Good morning. Can everybody hear me? Yes? Good. All right. So, thought about starting off this morning by asking if anybody's in the market for a new job. Your boss might be in the room, so I decided against that. Oh, nice. I like the honesty. So quick show of hands. Is there anybody here who's never looked for a new job? Okay. So in general, you've looked for a new job in at least some point in your life, unless maybe you're a college student or something. And it probably kind of sucked. You had to write a resume, which is the most boring document ever. You had to read through a whole bunch of job opportunities. You had a whole bunch of recruiters contacting you about jobs that you probably weren't interested in. Eventually, some of those jobs stuck. So you went through some interviews. You maybe got an offer, or maybe you didn't. And then you feel like you've wasted all that time. Or maybe you start what seems like the perfect job, and it turns out that director role isn't actually the director role you thought you were getting. Or maybe you aren't actually working with that shiny new technology that you thought you were working with. So I want to help you kind of learn how to gauge your job opportunities to prevent those things from happening. So what makes me think I know about this? Well, I have 6 years of experience in HR and recruiting. My background is in diversity recruiting for temps at FedEx SmartPost. I have done recruiting and hiring for people in a boot camp program, for people in public sector projects, and I currently recruit for a software consulting company called Improving. I'm also very involved in our community, so I spend a lot of time talking to programmers at conferences and on Twitter. I help with a couple of conferences myself. I organize the Microsoft-focused dog food conference, do marketing for Cloud Develop, host a number of user groups as well. So I'm out in the community listening to people's career concerns. And I have an MBA in something called organizational leadership that focuses a lot on growing and building an organization and the talent within it. So in general, your job search questions are going to fall into one of 4 categories. You'll have professional growth, which is things like when is it time to make a career move and what should you be considering when weighing opportunities. You have your human resources and benefits, and this is things like salary, insurance, can you take your dog to work, those kind of perks and things that we look at that make us attracted to a position. In our industry, you have legal considerations as well. Some of these deal with just non-competes if you're looking for work with a competitor, and intellectual property concerns as well. So the things that you're creating on your own, who owns those, and we'll touch on that. And finally, you do a cultural evaluation. You want to make sure that the work that you're doing is a good fit, but you also want to make sure that the company that you're working at is one that you'll be comfortable in. So in a perfect world, the job search process is a nice little line. You apply for a job, you go through some interviews, you get an offer, maybe the offer is not quite what you want, so you do some negotiating. Eventually everything works out, and you have an awesome new job. The problem is that the job search is generally not a straight line. It's more like a puzzle that you're trying to put together, and you have a lot of different pieces to it. You have you, your skills, your family, your concerns, your priorities. You have the company, its leadership, its size, things like the types of products it develops. You have the technical team that you'll be working with, their methodologies, their processes, strengths and challenges. And you have the human resources aspect. You have your recruiter, your hiring manager. And all of these pieces are trying to fit together in order for you to find the right opportunity. So as you're going through a job search, you're going to want to keep some basics in mind. The most important thing is to remember that you, as a developer, as a business analyst, as a technical professional, have very valuable skills. You probably know that there's not enough talent to fill the demand for IT professionals. We in the hiring world are competing for your talent. You're highly skilled, you're intelligent, and your skills are valuable. On the hiring manager end, we're people too. We're constantly living in what I once heard described as an ocean of rejection. We hear the word no a lot. Candidates tell us no, hiring managers tell us no, salespeople tell us no. In the meantime, we're becoming invested in our candidates, getting to know you, getting to know what you'd like to do with yourself, and help you figure that out. You're going to want to ask questions. From your very first interview to your first day on the job and afterwards, ask questions. Find out as much information as you can. And ultimately, don't be afraid to walk away. if something doesn't sit right for some reason, if something's not what you're looking for, there's a lot of opportunity out there, so don't take the first thing that comes along. So a big thing that you might want to know is, how do you know when it's time to look for a new job? The pro tip: the best time to look for a new job is when you don't actually need one. This is important because it'll give you time to think about what you'd like to do next, what future opportunities would be good for you, and it gives you time to find the right thing. What you don't want to do is wait until you're so desperate to leave your position that you take the first thing that comes along and wind up in another miserable position. So I've compiled a quick little top 10 list of indications that it's time for you to consider a new job. The first one, and the most common one that I see in our industry, is that you're not learning. We live and we work in an industry where you constantly have to be learning and you constantly have to be growing. And if you reach a point where you're no longer learning new technologies, you're no longer learning new skills, it's time for you to start thinking about something else. In a similar vein, you don't see any career progression. Maybe you've been in the same position for 3 years or 5 years, and you've had no increased responsibility and no increased salary, and you're not learning anything new. You're going to become stagnant in your skills, and ultimately that's going to make it hard for you to find a position down the line. Maybe your company's not investing in training. And the classic example of this is that the CFO and the CEO are in a conversation. CFO says to CEO, well, what if we invest in training our people and they leave? And CEO says to CFO, what if we don't and they stay? The point being, it's important for a company to invest in your training. Yes, you might eventually take those skills to a future employer, but you can also apply those skills to your current employer and make the organization as a whole better by bringing in your knowledge. Promotion and title only. This is something that happens, in a lot of cases you might be promoted to the director of JavaScript development or whatever. And so they give you this new title, but you don't get additional responsibilities, you don't get additional money. There's nothing additional other than your business card changes. That's showing that the company's not generally invested in your growth, and they're probably doing it just kind of to shut you up. Instability, and this manifests itself in a lot of ways. Maybe it's a leadership change. Maybe you're seeing projects and priorities constantly change. Maybe there's a lot of turnover within your coworkers. When things start to become unstable, it's time for you to start planning your exit strategy. Cultural change. This tends to be pretty common if maybe you're at a startup that gets bought out by a bigger company, or a leadership change. Maybe you'll change the culture, and so the culture that the company had when you joined might change over time, and it's no longer something that you're comfortable with. Relocation, kind of a more practical one, but maybe you want to move to a city with more opportunities, or your family, move closer to family. You want to start looking for your opportunities early on, again, so you don't have to take the first thing that comes along. Abusive leadership. So your boss is condescending. He or she talks down to you. They don't support you in your career growth. They don't respect you. Those are signs that it's time to move on. Similarly, you don't like your coworkers. You spend a lot of time with your coworkers, and you're not maybe going to love all of them, but you need to get along with them and be comfortable with them. And finally, we all have these days when we just don't want to go to work. But if this is every day, if every morning you're waking up and you're just dreading going to work and you're dreading doing your job, start getting out of there before things get worse. So if you've decided it's time for you to start looking for a new position, you're going to want to grab a pen and paper, or your laptop, or your tablet, and sit down and do some thinking. I'm going to give you 6 questions that you can consider, and just be thinking through these as you're assessing job opportunities. What are your strengths? And don't limit your strengths just to the languages that you work with and the tools that you use. Consider things like you're very good at mentoring people, you're very good at coaching, you're very good at explaining technical things to non-technical users. Those are strengths just as much as your knowledge of C#. Think about why you work in technology. Were you attracted to it because you were a lifelong programmer? Did you like the money? Was it something else entirely? Have that in mind. Think about what you like best about working in technology. Some people really like figuring out complex algorithms. Some people love developing websites they can send their family to. And some people like the more business analysis type roles where they're helping the end users and the technical teams work together. So think about that as well. Consider your ideal role. Maybe you want to move into leadership or architecture. Maybe you want to move into project management. Those are all things that you'll want to consider as well. Kind of a classic job search question. What work would you do if you could work for free? You may not necessarily be able to do this work, but if, for example, you're very passionate about healthcare, apply for jobs with a healthcare company. You can contribute then in some way, or work for a nonprofit that you're interested in. So this can help you if you feel like you support the mission of the company you're working for. And finally, think through your career path. At some point in the technology world, we tend to face a choice where we might decide whether or not to stay technical or to move into a people management role. And that's something that you'll want to be considering, as well as thinking about whether or not you even want to be in technology. Maybe you want to do something else entirely. In addition to your goals, think through your priorities. And these are going to be different for everybody. But kind of the main categories of priorities are compensation. Some people, this is their number one. You need to make a really high salary for whatever reason. Others might be willing to take less salary because they want equity in a company, or they want to work for a nonprofit, or they like some other perk of the company. Consider travel. Some people love travel positions. Some people hate it. Prioritize where that falls. Company size. For me personally, this is a big one. I tend to like working in a smaller company where I feel like I have more insight into leadership, I have more flexibility in my role, and I can have more impact on the company. Other people like the larger company. There's a little bit more structure, there's a little bit more formality. It's just a little bit more comfortable for them. Location. Do you want to work from home? Do you want to work remote? Do you have geographic limitations? Make sure your recruiter knows that. Company culture. What kind of values do you want in your company? Company growth and your growth opportunities within that company. Going into a large organization, it might be harder to find growth opportunities. It might be riskier to go into a smaller organization from a growth standpoint. So consider those things. And finally, perks. These are the things like the ping pong table and the beer fridge and taking your dog to work. Not maybe necessarily the most important thing, but still something that people value, and there's nothing wrong with that. One note about your priorities is that they can be limiting factors as well. Let's face it, it's going to be hard to find a job at a shiny startup in Columbus, Ohio. And on the flip side, moving to the coast and taking a job at a shiny startup can affect your cost of living and your kind of lifestyle as well. So keep those sorts of limitations in mind. Things like work from home, only wanting remote positions can sometimes be a limiting factor. Even things sometimes like dress code. You know, if you don't want to wear a tie, you might not be able to work at certain companies, and that's just something you have to be comfortable with. If your perfect job doesn't exist, you can move somewhere that it does exist. You can create it, go out and start doing your own thing, or you can decide where you're going to compromise, which is probably what you're going to do. So you figure out what you want to trade off and what your most important things are and keep those in mind. So at this point, we're going to jump forward a little bit, since this is not a resume writing or an interview skills workshop. So we're going to assume at this point you've thought through your priorities, you've applied for some jobs, and you're now into the interviewing and negotiation stage. So let's talk a little bit about human resources, about benefits, and how to assess those things. First of all, the salary question. It sucks. I don't like asking it. You don't like answering it. So let's talk about it. It's hard because it's uncomfortable. It's a little bit of taboo in our society to talk about salary, to talk about how much money we make. There's some mistrust. I might be worried that you're trying to get more money than you're worth. You might be worried that I'm trying to undervalue you. And that's something that we need to get past as we have a salary conversation. A lot of this mistrust and a lot of this discomfort actually comes from a lack of information. So when you go into the salary conversation and when you apply for jobs, do some research. Go in armed with the knowledge of what you make, what you're worth, and be ready to ask for that. And there are privacy concerns as well. This can be awkward if, for example, I'm interviewing a friend of mine. It gets a little weird to be like, hey, friend that I've known forever, how much money are you making? Like, it's kind of strange. It can feel like a privacy violation, but it's a necessary conversation to have. So let's talk about why you should answer the salary question. It can be a reality check. It can give you insight into things like market limitations, salary availability, and market trends. You can learn your value. I was once interviewing a woman who quoted me a salary requirement that was $20,000 under the market salary. I told her this, and I told her that she should be making X as opposed to the Y number that she had quoted me, and she thanked me for that. But if she hadn't given me a salary requirement, she would have gone on asking for $20,000 less every interview she had. The company is working under constraints. There are salary caps. In the case of consulting industries, there are things like client bill rates that we're working within. So we need to know whether or not things make sense. If you're looking for $500,000 and my position pays $100,000, we can't really compromise there. So let's just get that out of the way and move the process forward. So when do you want to answer the salary question? In general, it's going to come up in that first initial conversation with your recruiter, with your hiring manager. So just answer it early in the process, not necessarily at the beginning of the interview, but probably toward the end of the conversation it'll come up. Just wait till the interviewer asks and be ready to answer. How do you answer it? You don't necessarily have to give an exact number. A $5,000 to $10,000 range is good. It tells us whether or not we're in the ballpark and we can move forward. If you're really uncomfortable just quoting a number, turn around and ask the recruiter. Ask them what the range is, emphasize whether or not you're negotiable, and let them know that there might be other priorities that you have in mind, and so you might be willing to compromise on the salary. So if you've gone through the salary, you've got your offer, and you want to do some negotiating, you're going to want to do some research. The most important thing for you to do in salary negotiation is to make sure that the person you're negotiating with likes you. If you're likable, if you're handling the conversation in a professional and respectful way, that person's more likely to go to bat for you and try to get you a higher salary. You can do some research, use some salary calculators. Two tools that I like are payscale.com and salary.com. These are both websites where you can put in your skills, the amount of experience you have, and your location, and it'll give you a bell curve showing the ranges of salaries in your area. Another tool is glassdoor.com. It is an employer reviewing website, but it does list salary data, and sometimes we'll make comments of things like, this company pays under market salary. So that can be another tool. You can look at online job listings. So the salary for retailer A might not be listed in their job listing, but the salary for retailer B might be, and that can give you a ballpark of what the retailers are paying for salary, for example. And this is really helpful, especially in some public sector type work and education and some nonprofit. Sometimes you can actually run a Google search and find a PDF document that'll list what the salaries are within the different positions that they offer. And ask around. You should have a few friends, a few peers in your industry who you can talk to about things like this and find out what they're making and find out what their market rates are and have those information. So when you're negotiating, like I said, make sure that you are friendly with your recruiter. Make sure that you are being polite, but emphasize your competence. Explain the things that you bring to the table and the things that you can do that somebody else might not. Don't be cocky about it. You're not God's gift to programming. At least that's not what they want to hear during the conversation. They want to hear the things that you are good at, that set you apart, that make you worth that extra $5,000 or $10,000. Have your thoughts organized. Have a rationale. It's always really refreshing when I have this conversation for somebody who's relocating, and they can say things like, I've done research on the market in Columbus, and this is what salaries for this position pay. That's a rationale right there. I don't have to justify it to my manager. We can just talk. Obviously, listen to the other person. This is a conversation, so you'll want to have some back and forth. Understand the limitations, because there probably are some constraints when it comes to salary, so just know those and be realistic. Make a reasonable counteroffer. Back to the 100,000 versus 500,000, there's not a whole lot of reasonableness in there, but maybe $10,000, $15,000, you can work within that range. Consider alternative compensation. Maybe you are willing to take a lower salary if you can have more PTO or flex time or work from home. Limit the personal details, though. Your salary is important, but it's not professional or necessary to tell your interviewer about your sick child, how high your mortgage is, or any of those personal details that affect your finances. That's your business and your business alone. In addition to salary, you have insurance, of course. Most of these you're probably familiar with. The exception might be supplemental insurance. This is something like Aflac. Some employers offer it, and it'll cover things like lost wages. It might help offset co-pays, mileage to and from doctors, that kind of thing. So things to ask about. Insurance is a big, tricky topic. In a previous life, I sold insurance for Nationwide. I worked with life and health insurance as well as property and casualty and got fairly well acquainted with these things, but there's a lot. So when you have your salary offer from your employer, you should ask to see the insurance policy. You should ask to find out what the coverages are, who the carrier are, and you should weigh a lot of different things. Look at the cost. How much will the insurance cost you out of pocket? How much, if any, is your employer covering? How much do they cover for your family as well? Look at the network. You probably have your preferred doctors, so you're going to want to ask about the medical network and find out whether or not your doctors are within that network. Deductible is the amount of money you pay out of pocket before insurance covers. There's usually, general rule of thumb, higher deductibles, lower premiums, and vice versa, so something to consider. Copays are what you pay when you get your prescriptions, when you go to the doctor. Again, something to consider. Policy type, and this is a big one. You have generally 3 different types of policies. PPO is Preferred Provider Organization. This is the type of insurance where if you need to go to a specialist, you can just go to the specialist. You don't need to see your primary care doctor to get a referral. They generally offer a little bit more robust out-of-network coverage as well. They also tend to be the most expensive type of insurance policy. An HMO, Health Maintenance Organization, requires you to have a referral anytime you see a specialist. So if you need to see the dermatologist, you have to first visit your primary care doctor, and he needs to refer you to the dermatologist. And then you have the HSA, the Healthcare Savings Account. And this is a pre-tax savings account that helps cover medical coverage. It can result in lower insurance premiums, but it's a higher out-of-pocket cost up front. Ask about specialized procedures and things like alternative care. Some insurance policies cover massage and chiropractor and holistic medicine and even do things like cover fitness, but not all of them. So ask about that. And this last one is something that's very important and not talked about enough, but look into the mental health benefits and the mental health coverage. And I want to pause here to talk about this because a study in 2014 by the National Institute of Mental Health showed that nearly 20% of adults have a mental illness. And this is something that's still taboo to talk about, and it's something that's very important in your job search. It ties into your insurance, and it ties into your culture and your environment. So let's talk a little bit about how to address these. And full disclosure, I'm ADHD, a diagnosed adult, take medication for it. So deal with some of this stuff myself, and I'm happy to bring my experiences into this. So under the Americans with Disabilities Act, your employer, your interviewer, is not legally allowed to ask if you have a disability. You, however, are required to reveal if you have a disability, if it affects your ability to do your jobs. You're also required to reveal it if you need accommodations. So why might you versus why might you not want to reveal this? Once you reveal that you have a mental health disability, you have protection under the Americans with Disabilities Act. You can't be fired because of your mental illness. You might not want to reveal it, though, because it's a privacy thing. It's stigma, it's taboo, unfortunately, and people don't like to talk about it. So you might be uncomfortable talking about it. If you need job accommodations, if you need your employer to do something for you, you need to reveal that. No accommodations needed, maybe everything's cool, you don't necessarily need to bring it up. You can gain some empathy if You struggle with bipolar disorder and you're having a very bad day and your employer knows that, they can empathize a lot more rather than just saying, oh, they're not at work today, or oh, they're not performing. It's good for your managers to know what's wrong so that they can help you through it. There is a fear of negative reactions, unfortunately, but honestly, it's a stress relief to just get this out in the open. Just let your employer know what's going on. So when do you reveal this? You don't necessarily need to reveal it in the interview process. If you do, it can show some honesty. It can show some ability to overcome adversity. The unfortunate consequence is that it could be a potential for somebody not to select you for a job. I would like to think that that doesn't happen, but it's just something that I want to put out there. I think the right time to reveal this is shortly after you start a position. You've been hired on. You've taken a little bit of time to prove your ability to do your work, and you can talk to your employer and get the ADA protections that you're guaranteed. What you don't want to do is wait until an issue arises. You don't want to wait until something snowballs or gets out of control and then have to bring it up, because it becomes more uncomfortable and more difficult, and in some cases the problem could have been avoided. So this is a tricky conversation to have, and here's how you do it. You explain you have a medical condition and how it affects your work. So in my case, shortly after I started my current position, I told my boss, hey, I have ADHD. I use these tools to kind of make sure I manage my tasks and that things get done, but I do tend to forget things. I have a hard time sitting still. Just so you know, this is me, and this is something that you need to be aware of. Who do you tell? You tell your HR manager at minimum, because they can help you with benefits. If the insurance isn't wanting to cover your treatment, they can help you get that covered. And they're also the ones who are going to make sure that the legal stuff is taken care of. And if you need accommodations, you let your supervisor know. And the University of Massachusetts Medical School actually put out a really good document that dug into all this stuff in a lot more detail and had a lot of links and resources, and I'm happy to share that out afterwards. So in addition to this, you have all the fun benefits. You have your vacation. Look at things like maternity and paternity leave. Some big ones you might not think about, ask about parking. If you have a position that works downtown, you might need parking. And so ask about that and ask whether or not it's covered. Education and conference reimbursement. Is your employer going to pay for you to come to Stir Trek? Are they going to make you take PTO to come to Stir Trek? Ask about those things early on. Ask if they cover training materials. In a similar vein, some companies do things like reimburse for your laptop or help you buy gadgets or help you buy your dev tools or your software licenses. Ask about those things so you're not surprised later. Ask about mentoring programs, training programs. Maybe those are very important to you. Maybe you want to mentor people. Ask if that's an option. And dress code, and it's an endless list of potential benefits, but just make sure you know all of the things that the company's offering you as you're weighing your different offers. So at this point, you've decided it's time to make a move, and you're happy with the salary and the benefits offered by a company. Let's talk a little bit about the legal considerations. Full disclosure, I am not a lawyer. I completed 1 year of law school and quit because it was not for me. So I cannot do a deep dive on intellectual property or non-competes, but these are important things that you need to know about and be aware of. Intellectual property, what is it? It is an idea, invention, or process deriving from the mind or intellect. If you Google this, there's a lot more information. The legally inclined definitions specify that these are things that you can copyright, trademark, license, or patent. And Wikipedia's article on this actually expanded it to cover things like phrases, symbols, designs, discoveries, inventions. Anything that comes from your brain that you create could be your intellectual property. So why the heck does this matter for your job? Well, you're creating stuff. You're giving conference talks. You're building apps in the App Store. You're writing blog posts, even things like the tweets you're composing. Those are all your intellectual property, and your employer may or may not want rights to some of those things. General rule of thumb, IP is semi-straightforward. Open source type code and software that you write, not owned. Employer-owned IP, the code base that you get when you start a position, the technology or the patents that the company that you're working for has before you start there, those belong to your employer. In general, the stuff you write for yourself belongs to you. Where it gets tricky is something called work for hire. So the code you write for your employer belongs to your employer in exchange for you getting a payment. It's a contractual obligation. Where this gets gray is things like your conference talks, or your blog posts, or your app that you're putting in the Android store. Those are the things that you'll want to ask about and look in your employment contract to find out who owns the rights to those things. Basically, you want to know who owns the work that's done by your employer, who owns the work that's done on your own, and what limits are there. In addition, non-competes are a thing you have to worry about. Non-compete's just an agreement where you decide basically not to work for a competitor. Two general constraints of non-competes, they're usually limited by time or distance. And a lot of times why these exist is they basically don't want you to take your proprietary information, customer data, confidential data, all that kind of stuff, and take it down the road to a competitor. So they'll place restrictions like you can't work in a competitor for up to a year after your position, or you can't work for a competitor within a 30-mile radius. This varies wildly by state. In general, non-competes are hard to enforce. Not something I would take a whole lot of chances with, but they are very tricky to enforce historically. So there's something that you'll want to keep in mind and consider, and make sure you're using kind of some common sense. You know, if you leave consulting company A at this client and you go to consulting company B and consult for the same client, that's obviously a non-compete violation. But if you go to a different consulting company and work for a completely different client in a different industry, it's probably not. But it's something that you'll want to be aware of and gauge. Again, I'm not a lawyer. If there's something in your contract that you're not comfortable with or that you have questions about, consult a lawyer. I know people that have done this over especially IP rights. People who are community leaders and conference speakers, we want to own our own things, and so we want to know who owns the things that we're creating. If you're uncomfortable with the contract, you can renegotiate or you can try to walk away. So you like the job, you're happy. Let's talk about culture. We all like to talk about corporate culture and what makes a good culture. The tricky thing about it is that a good culture is different for everybody. So what you consider a good culture and what your friend considers as a good culture will vary, and you're going to want to consider a lot of things when you're deciding which culture is right for you. There are a lot of good questions you can ask. A big indicator, ask the employer, potential employer, where they find their talent. In general, a company that hires a lot of its talent through its network, through its current employees, probably has a good culture. People like working there, and they want their friends to work there. Ask about retention. Companies with high turnover rates, companies that have a lot of people leaving, generally not companies that you might want to work for. And when it comes to retention, ask why companies are losing people, where they're going. Are they going to competitors? Are they going full-time at clients? Are they starting something else? That can also be an indicator. Communication. Ask about communication. Some people want to know what's going on within a company a lot. And that's something you can ask. How frequently is management going to update you on what's happening with the company? How in touch with the company are you going to feel? Or are you going to be out on this island all by yourself? Ask about work-life balance. This one's super, super important. Some people don't care about this. They're happy to work 80 hours a week. They're happy to work around the clock. They're happy to be on call. Some people like something in between. Some people want to go home at 5 o'clock and be done programming. Nothing wrong with any of that, but something that you'll want to ask about before you go in. Look at the company's online presence. A quick Google search can do a lot of things. It can reveal how a company manifests itself online, if it's engaging with the community, what sorts of things it's doing, who its people are that work there. Those can all be good indicators or bad indicators of culture. Consider the value the company places on learning. A company that places a high value on you learning new things and on your training is probably a good company to work for because it means they're invested in you and in you growing your career and your skill set. Community support can be a good gauge of culture. For me, this one's important. I actually left my previous employer because they were not as supportive of the community and were kind of giving me a lot of pushback about wanting to do community things. We have a community that it has a lot of stuff going on and a lot of things that need supported. And so working for a company that supports those things might be important to you. And shared interests. You don't necessarily have to be the same person as all of your other coworkers. You don't want to be the same person as all of your coworkers. But it is nice to have a couple hobbies in common with your coworkers so that you have something to talk about over lunch or at the water cooler. It's kind of fun to talk about the soccer game or the board game rather than just talking about work all the time. When you're evaluating culture, interview your interviewer. Ask your interviewer how long they've been at the company. If they've been at the company a long time, it could be a really good company to work for. Ask why they joined the company and why they stay there. It's actually one of my favorite questions. People ask me, why did you join your company? Why didn't you join that company? It's a good question, and it can be revealing. Ask about highlights of the company. What are the good things about working at the company? What are some of the perks? Also ask how the company has changed in the time the recruiter has been there. And finally, ask about challenges. If the recruiter tells you that the company has no challenges, the recruiter is lying. Very important to ask about challenges and ask how they overcome them. There are tools you can use to evaluate culture. Google is, of course, your biggest one. I mentioned Glassdoor earlier. Other good indications can be awards. Maybe the company's won a lot of awards. Things like social media engagement, press releases, those sorts of visibility can tell you a little bit about a company and what it's all about. How approachable does it seem? How open does it seem? And find people that work there. Go on LinkedIn and look up a company and see if anybody in your first or second level connections knows people who work at that company. Or if you know anybody who works at that company, and reach out, get their thoughts, ask them about the company. The closer you are to the person, the more insight they're going to give you. It's very, very important to do this last thing, to talk with your network when you're evaluating your culture. You're trying to decide which team to join. And so you want to know who you're talking to, what you're getting into before you join the company. The more close you are to somebody, if your best friend works at a company, they're going to give you all the insight that you could possibly need. Somebody you might not know as well might be a little bit more diplomatic, but you can still get some insight. That said, keep in mind the context. Somebody who's disgruntled, who's cynical, who hates their employer, probably not going to give you the most objective assessment. And on the flip side, somebody who's been with their company for 2 months and is in that honeymoon stage, it's the best company ever, of course. So again, keep these things in mind, but reaching out to your network and talking to people can be a big help when gauging companies. If this happens, run away. Don't underestimate the power of your gut. Everything might look good on paper, everything might sound good in the conversations, but you just have that nagging feeling that something's not right. Run away. Find something else. So at this point, you have an idea of what to look for, what you're gauging. You've learned the salary, the benefits, you've gauged the HR questions, and you know the culture. So how do you ultimately decide which opportunity is right for you? Well, we're back to a puzzle. And you're going to figure out what's right by considering all these things, just like you would any other decision. You're going to weigh all of the data, all of those questions you just asked, and all of those answers you just received, compare those across opportunities. If this is relevant, consider your family. Is taking this position going to require a cross-country move or a change to the way things are done? Will it cover the insurance needs of somebody? Those are important things because your job doesn't just affect you, it affects your family as well. Take your time. Don't let somebody rush you into a decision. Give the recruiter, if you have another offer, let the recruiter know, hey, I have another offer, I'll get back to you at the end of next week. That's perfectly reasonable, and if they're pressuring you to make an offer, that might be an indication to take a step back and wonder why they're in such a hurry for you to decide. And again, ask questions. Every time you have a question, ask those questions. If your hiring manager, your recruiter, is hesitant to answer those questions, that's probably a sign, too, that they're not revealing something. Finally, you're awesome, and you deserve an awesome job. So I'd like to thank everybody for coming here. I'd like to thank the people I've talked to about this over the years. And if you have any questions, I am happy to answer those.
Cassandra, I got a question.
Okay.
So you were talking before
Yes.
So if it's something where it's someone within the family, what other kind of, how would you approach that? Is there different options, those type of things as well? Or?
In that case, it would be obviously look at the medical insurance policy and find out what the coverages are for. Oh, the question was mental health benefits for maybe somebody in your family as opposed to yourself, and how to find out about that. So in that case, you would look at the benefits package, find out what coverages are for the family, what limitations are. And as far as kind of approaching it with your supervisor, approach it like any other medical condition, because that's what it is. You know, your child needs chemotherapy, your child needs some other treatment. It's still a medical treatment that they need, and so tell your supervisor. Again, you don't have to go into a ton of detail. It can be as plain as my child needs regular doctor appointments or therapy, and leave it at that if that's all you're comfortable revealing.
I mean, is that something that you would qualify or start looking into using like FMLA for that type of things? Or is it something where if it's just, or I guess that's the thing, is it something where most companies, they tend to just not go there and just say, okay, you got a couple, you got like an hour a week type of thing or something like that? Or is it something where they need to use FMLA all the time to do that?
So I believe FMLA requires you to, like there's restrictions, like it's a block of time sort of thing, so you have to use up all of your PTO and then your FMLA kicks in. So if it's, I guess maybe if it's an ongoing treatment sort of thing, then it might apply, but I actually, again, not a lawyer, but I think that when it comes to like regular appointments and stuff, it shouldn't be an FMLA issue. Yep.
I have a question about salary negotiation. So part of that is factored in with the benefits package, and a lot of times I decline it because I have coverage through my spouse. What is your opinion on negotiating a higher salary because you decline the benefits?
Okay, so the question was, should you negotiate a higher salary because you've declined benefits? The answer is yes. That is something that your employer is not paying in the overhead to pay for you, and so it might result in a higher salary. I'm going to draw from my specific case. In my case, sometimes people will choose to be a W-2 employee with or without benefits, and the without benefits position has a higher hourly rate. So it's something to ask. It might not be a dollar for dollar match, but if you're not declining benefit, or if you're declining benefits, then that's something that works in your favor in the negotiation, and it's something you can bring up. Oh, blue shirt.
After you've already accepted and started a job, if there was, if they were promising some sort of perk to you, and then it turns out like either that has yet, they're not providing it to you after all. Is there anything that you can do to necessarily, so like let's say this was a perk that it was sort of, part of your overall compensation package, or a software package, for example.
Okay.
Is that something that you can renegotiate later? Is there a good way to bring that up, or is that like possibly a sticking point where maybe you need to reevaluate where you're at?
So like a financial perk, or things like covering software licensing, or?
Yeah. So like let's if if you come here, we provide you with like training or like access to this software library and whatnot, and then you start and then you find out that that's actually like no one has that, and they sort of told you you were told that in the interview process and the initial negotiation process, but then it's not there, and apparently it's been a sticking point for a number of years.
Okay, so you do bring that up with your immediate supervisor, ask, hey, why are these things not being covered? Kind of call them out on that. They're not giving you something that was promised in your package. If it's something that, say your next opportunity that stuff comes up, see if it's something they can write into your offer letter or into your employment contract to kind of avoid that in the future. But I think it's just something you just push back on and you emphasize, hey, you told me that this was something that I would offer, and I think that if there are several people that have had that promise made and it's not happening, that probably could strengthen the case too.
You mentioned non-compete agreements.
Yes.
Have you ever dealt with non-solicitation agreements?
I haven't done a whole lot with that. Well, non-solicitation, like not hiring from an employer.
Right. So, like, you can't hire somebody you work with, or have anything to do with hiring.
Yes. So that's kind of falls a little bit under the non-compete window. Sometimes it comes up actually in two different ways. So in some cases, it's you used to work with somebody and you want to recruit them into your current company. Is that what you're getting at? A lot of times that's just a time thing. Like once that non-compete window of 6 months or a year is gone, you're usually safe to try to recruit somebody in. The semi-sneaky workaround is to have maybe a coworker try to bring that person in the company sooner. It's something that, whether or not you're comfortable doing that, that's something you can do. The other non-solicitation thing that sometimes comes up is in the world of consulting companies, clients wanting to hire people in full-time. And that's something you should ask about if, it's a situation you're in. If I go consult with this client for 6 months, are they going to hire me full-time? And if so, am I obligated to go full-time? Anybody else? Okay.
I obviously have a LinkedIn profile,
Mm-hmm.
and I get a lot of email, well, not even a lot, but a couple a week where recruiters are asking if I'm interested in the opportunity. So my question is, whether or not I'm looking for a job, like always keeping my options open, how should I respond to those inquiries?
Okay, so responding to those 6 million recruiter emails you're getting on LinkedIn, basically just a polite response, hey, no, I'm not looking at this time. I'll let you know if anything changes. If something the recruiter says particularly intrigues you, maybe they personalize that message or something, you can kind of go further and maybe get to know them a little bit, but a polite thanks but no thanks is perfectly fine, and we get that all the time. Anybody else? Okay.
Yeah, my job, things in the last few years have been odd in that I haven't worked 40 hours a week as a programmer, but done consulting. I'm a better programmer than a salesman as a consultant, and I don't know from that exactly how to pitch my correct compensation.
Okay. In some cases, you can actually, again, I don't know the company you're working for or anything, but in some cases, some companies actually will offer a kickback or almost like a commission for sales type functions that you're doing. If they aren't, you could always approach.
No, I'm not the good salesman.
You don't want to do the sales stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're being told to do sales role.
No. I've been an independent consultant.
Okay.
And I'm looking for something that will generate more net income.
Okay, got it. So how to just generate more income then?
No, it's just working for a company, but how do I set my salary, given that my salary has been project related as opposed to hourly?
Okay, you do your research. You go on those salary calculators that I looked at. You look at hourly and kind of annual salary rates, and you quote those rates. If you need to, you can always ask for a little bit higher than what you're actually looking to make, because it gives you some negotiation room. So it's just going in armed with research, ready to make a good argument as to why that's what you're worth, and sticking to it.
Actually, I have a follow-up question
Okay.
on what you just said. I've heard the opinion from a lot of people that you should, when you're negotiating for salary, ask for higher than you're worth in anticipation of a lower counteroffer. Do you think that that's something you should always do? Are there certain situations where you would just value yourself at exactly what you're worth? Just what are your thoughts on that?
I think that's where that range kind of comes in handy. So you're looking for $75,000, and you say I'm looking to make 70 to 78, something like that. If you really feel like you need the negotiation room, then that's kind of an important strategy. As far as I'm concerned, the less negotiation, the better, because I hate it, but it is something you have to do. And so asking for a little bit higher gives you room to work down, and the employer room to work up. And then you kind of both feel like you've won. Anybody else? All right, well, if anybody else has questions, I'll be around the rest of the day. You can find me on Twitter. That's my email address, and that's my cutest dog ever. And I'll see you all throughout the day.